and hope you're all having a great week. Thanks for joining us for this brief presentation about version 1 of the Access template. We're going to do a few things today. First, we're going to cover some resources you may find useful when using the template. I recognize many names here with us today, so many of you are veterans to the template. And good news is there's not a whole lot different that you'll need to do to work with the template this year. But in case you are new, or in case you want a refresher, since it might have been a while since you've touched the template, we're going to go over some of the resources first. So you can see on the screen, oh, and I should do introductions real quick. My name is Michael McCarty. I am part of the MIS project here, eData Tech Support, better known as, here at Penn State. Joining us is Steve as well, who you all know is the guru of the Access template itself. So he's the star of the show today, and he'll be explaining some of the new features and items present in the template that we're talking about. And if you're wondering what the Access template is, again, many of you know this, but the Access template is a tool used for data analysis. So that final part of the data lifecycle that we have from the data collection to data entry in eData, and then finally pulling data out of eData to analyze it. That's what we use the template for, of course. And many of you have known and loved the template, or at least known the template for many, many years now. What you see shared on the screen is the resource page for the template itself. I'll go ahead and put a copy in the chat here. So the link is going out here in the chat, how to get to the template itself. The resources, the template lives on this page. It's a file that you can, is a zipped file you unzip and then run using Microsoft Access, and it is compatible with the export from eData. We're not going to cover some of the really into the weeds details about how to run the template and those kind of things today. We're just going to cover the overview of what's new and some of the resources. If you need support for running the template now or in the future, you can see on this web page, again, whose link is in the chat, we have the current template file posted. So it is live as of today, and that is compatible with this program year's data. One thing to note is that a template file is only compatible with the current year there, or the year that it's labeled. So you can see that's 5/6. And if you want to export data from eData from a previous program year, if we continue scrolling down, you can see we have prior year's template files going back to program year 17/18. And if you need something outside of this current program year, you'll need one of those corresponding year template files to analyze your data. If you need some resources or support in running the template and actually getting the export from eData into the template, there are two modules here. You can see there's a mention of the modules here up in this section at the top, but also links to the modules themselves down here. And there are two modules available. The first is setting up, which walks you through the process of aligning the export from eData on your machine with the Access database template file and putting those two pieces together to what we call populate your template. There's also a guide over here on the right, which provides step-by-step directions. So different ways. The modules are online and the guide is a document. So whichever you prefer, you could try both. One might just speak to you more than another. We have resources available in both of those formats. Also, some past webinars posted over here. Since we're recording today's webinar, we'll likely post today's webinar here as well if you or a colleague want to come back later to watch. So this web page is really the catch-all for everything. And when we review the template file here shortly, that's going to be this template file on the website. And again, it's a zip file available via this link. Before we get into the template and do anything there, I wanted to share a poll with all of you to see how often you update your template. So if this is working as expected, you should see on your screen a poll that asks a question, and that question is, how often do you populate the template? We see, looks like we've got the post coming in, so we'll give all of you a chance to respond to that. If you don't know or don't use the template yet, don't feel obligated to answer. But looks like most of you are responding. This is one of those things that helps us monitor one of the features that is actually being added this year, and also gives us a sense of how you're using the template.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So we'll give you another minute, and then I'll end the poll and share with all of you what the results are.
Looks like 26 have answered.
Yep.
Out of 30, that's pretty good.
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and end the poll. I'll share the results with all of you. So hopefully you're all seeing the results of the poll, which most of you look like you update the template at least weekly, maybe more. Excuse me. Some of you every 2 weeks, and then occasionally once per month or longer. And we weren't seeking a correct answer on this one. There's no pass fail here. It's really just whatever suits your needs. It's interesting and useful for us to know how often you update the template just in general, but also we'll discuss with you some changes that have been made to the performance reports. And these, knowing the frequency that you update the template helps us know what's going to actually happen with those performance reports. So,
And how to give direction.
yeah. All right, well, so thank you for your participation in the poll. Let's go straight into the template then. And if I'm still sharing my main screen, you should now see view 1 of the template. So it looks just like where we left off last year. In fact, version 1 of the template that we have for you this year started with the last version last year and just carried forward some new items. So we're mostly going to focus on the new items that Steve put in the template for this current 25-26 program year. And then there may be some time, I should say, if there is some time, we can take some questions at the end, anything you might have just from anything we discussed or just general questions as well. We plan to wrap up by about 12:30 because there are some other professional development things going on statewide. We want to make room for those. So let's just dive right in. The main page here, nothing has changed. Everything is consistent with what you saw last year. So we're going to walk through various pages that have some changes to them and discuss a little bit about what's different on each page. So we're going to, and as a reminder, I already have the pages open that I want to show you. So I'm going to navigate via these tabs across the top of the screen here. But if you are looking for these pages, any page outside of the main page when you start working in the template is available via this switchboard. And in general, the page pretty much contains what it says it contains, whether it's assessments, class group assignments, reports, family literacy data checking, all those things. There's also in the template guide an accounting for all of the queries by page, if you're curious, and that's maybe an easier way to sort through and find a specific query is using the guide, which shows you which page every query is on. So we're going to just go right here. Let's pretend we're using the switchboard. We'll go to the performance page here. And we're sharing, there might be some data that we share with you this afternoon, but this is a scrubbed template. So agency name, staff name, adult names, it's all been scrubbed clean. That also sometimes means that the data we try to share in the queries, one in particular I know is not going to work. We try to run the query and it's blank because sometimes when you scrub data, you remove the links that make the queries work. They should work in your template though, but as always, if you notice any glitches or bugs, please do let us know. We're on the performance reports page and nothing spatially or button-wise has changed here. However, there is a feature now that will be invisible, so to speak, to you when you update the template, where the template will automatically build the performance data every time you update it. And how you might see that is, I had this template empty, this version 1. I updated it, and then I was able to create this report, and then it will show a line for the date of today. And you could see right here, its most recent add date was 10/8/25. And if I look here, I'll see 10/8/25. So there is data in here from today. I did not click this build performance data button. So I think, Steve, you had some comments maybe you wanted to make about how you built that into the system and maybe some things that everybody can keep in mind with those performance reports moving forward.
Yeah, it's like Michael said, it's automatically generated when you do the load on the main page, the update, and then so if you were to come in here and click build again, it would build it again for you on the same day, which is not a problem. The maintenance of these records is best done through the delete date drop down that Michael was showing you. If you're getting too many dates for whatever reason, just go in there and just start deleting the dates you don't want. If you were to, let's say, update your template every day in a week, and you really didn't need all 5 days of the performance data, just go in and delete the ones you don't need. What this does is for me is it gives me data that I can use to do other things with that I know will be there instead of optionally being there. So this was this is a to be forthcoming
Mm,
analysis that we'll do on this data that right now is just going to be generated automatically. So if you have any questions about that, it does not, however, back up your data. You
mhm,
still need to periodically click the backup performance data to Excel. And of course, when we change versions, when we go to version 2 early next year, we'll remind you how to back up your data and then start the new template and restore the data from there.
mhm.
So if there's any questions on that, I'll take questions.
Yeah, Steve, this is probably a no-brainer question, but just in case, I'm a sub-grantee. I cannot access this. I don't have to do any kind of backup performance to Excel,
Right.
right?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. You're kind of stuck. Sorry.
No, no, that's
Mhm.
great. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing a step.
Right. Right. Good question.
And we may very well, we have to see what else is on the agenda, but the next quarterly lunchtime webinar that we do, we may very well spend some of that reviewing again the performance reports just because it will be timely. It's not something that you are required to run, and it's not something that you're necessarily going to need to run right off the bat at the beginning of the program year. But as we get to the middle and end of the year, it's likely something that you may be interested because it is one of the most powerful ways to see data change over time via the template. Most everything else is just a snapshot of a given point in time, but these reports can show you change over time at a high level, pretty much with your aggregated data, and that could still be very useful. And the one thing we'll leave you with before we move on to the next page, as you mentioned, Steve, you got the delete date function. If you're nervous about using that, or just as a matter of best practice, you can always do the backup of the performance data to Excel, the folder that needs to be created on your data folder. Your data drive would be your performance reports backup here in yellow. Once that's created, the backup performance data to Excel will create these two tables, and they will enable you to back things up. And you can do that before you do any deleting down here if you're nervous about deleting a date you didn't intend to. And that's just some management. And again, we'll at a later time we'll go over that whole process top to bottom in more detail. The biggest change and the only change really going into this year is that automation that Steve mentioned. Next page we're going to bounce to is the assessments page. Here you'll notice a lot of familiar assessments with some new additions, and generally speaking, in the template, when a version releases and there's something new or updated, there'll be these little red tags immediately adjacent to the queries that are updated. UPD as update, new is of course new. One new item more timely for this year, and all the three new items you see on the page are a variation of queries that existed before. it was really what was called a max date assessment query, but they've been modified to run with the target of being used at a specific time in the program year. So you may say the order of these reports change as we get into version 2 and 3, because we'll be getting into the last half of the program year. In short, the way this works is the adults with eligible rollover assessment references a table that we have built into the existing query that contains information about the assessments the students took last year. And by referencing and looking at last year's assessment and comparing it to this year, it will provide a list of students who may have a rollover assessment that's eligible to be rolled over as long as it's within a certain date of 150 days expiration date, but do not have a current year assessment. And that's all baked into this title of this query: eligible rollover assessment from previous year with no current program year assessment. If I run this query, it's going to be blank. This is one of those things where the link to the previous year's data no longer works because we scrubbed the data. When you run that, it may also be blank. That just indicates that anybody that would have had a rollover assessment does not have one, because they either have no rollover or they have an assessment in the system already. Did you want to add anything to that, Steve?
Just that particular line in the third line down on the spatially on the screen used to be the line that's now underneath the reports July dash update. That line used to be up there, so not to confuse anyone, but I moved those two down and put the new one in up top just visually so that it was easier to kind of go to, in especially in the version 1, when you're going to be probably hitting that fairly frequently with the looking for the eligible rollovers from the previous year. So the ones down below are, especially the updated one, that was there last spring, and it will not work in the fall because of the separate program years. It works in the spring, and so does the new one underneath it, which is the inverse of the one right above it. So that's why it says reports February through July. Those are meant to be run from between February and July. So next year those will become active.
And part of the reason, I think, Steve, you mentioned was that these won't work right now because they look for dates and timing aligned with the end of the program year. Most notably, to your point, they'll work at the end of the year, and they were there last year because they're designed to be used to capture data going into the new program year for those folks that are going to have an eligible. So right now, these are just hanging out, waiting to be used in the second half of the year. That's why, Steve, you created this new one up here, because now you can use this third from the top to start the program year. Although as we get into later October, November, the folks on this may start fading away, so to speak, because they won't have assessments that are eligible anymore. The 150 days component of expiration will start removing folks from that list, and they won't show anymore. So eventually this will fade out, and you'll begin to use those, and we'll continue to provide some reminders when we do our webinar for version 2 and then version 3. We'll be sure to update all of you with that process and just some reminders.
And we put a description on it. If you click on it, it'll give you the verbiage of what we did. I know it's a little lengthy, but it'll maybe help you try to understand.
Yeah, and to get to that, any query, the main page doesn't have this because the query buttons are the descriptions, but any box type query or report that has a description to the right of it is going to have this mouse over with the hand, and that means it's a clickable link, and that takes you to these descriptions. And these descriptions are also in the template guide, so you can search. There's no way to search in the template to find a phrase or specific item, but there is a way to search in the guide. You can use that to then say, oh, on the assessment page, I see there's a eligible rollover assessment query. So you can come here and and run it, and you can even confirm the description there. So NRS reports, we're not going to spend a lot of time here. Just wanted to note that there are certain demographic fields that were added to these NRS queries, and contract agency has been updated to account for EFL gains, not just in the lowest EFL, so a more broad, and that was the by contract agency. This one is now updated. And there is a little bit of work going on behind the scenes to continue to update these table fours, because now there are MSGs that can be tracked for adults in ABE level 6 adults. So we're considering possible updates and changes, but right now the only change to these NRS reports is in the by contract agency, accounting for adults that have gains that are not just in the lowest EFL NRS entry exit pair, but any gain from any assessment, and demographics that have been added to these details buttons. And those were based on the survey results that you responded to last spring, saying these were the demographic items that we were interested in having added to multiple queries. So now they're showing up in more and more spots across the template. Is there anything, Steve, that you'd want to add to the NRS reports page here?
As you're using this page, as you get into the year, you could do us a favor and test the by contract agency against maybe the by contract or the by agency to see if you've got any difference in numbers. And if you do, just shoot us an email, because that gives us a good testing for the logic will eventually be applied to all of them. But in the process of testing, we learned last year, it's really hard.
Yeah, and so just to summarize, the by contract agency is where the change is. So by contract, by agency, these queries, which produce the same table, so all three can produce table 4 and 4B, but the logic in by contract agency has been updated to include EFL gains from the other subtest pairs outside of the NRS entry exit pair. So what you're describing, Steve, is such that you might see a different number, more than likely higher, on the by contract agency query, because it's taking into account more tests. But that was reasonably complex logic that we didn't want to necessarily dive into adding to all these other items until we had a full and robust and really took the time to test it. And that's kind of what you were speaking to, Steve, is letting us know what you see, which is additional feedback that lets us know, okay, we're on the right track. Now we can go take the time and add those items to these other queries and make them all the same. But we didn't want to do that until we had a chance to really test it robustly. Now the monitoring page, I need your help a little bit with this one, Steve. You had mentioned about the staff query showing full and part-time counts and percentages. Which query is that on here?
The count staff and volunteers on the right half of the page. Yeah,
This one.
that one. That's got a new, it opens two
tabs, yes.
Yeah, and that was just a new feature Amanda wanted, so it's available to everybody.
Yep. And that's the most notably the percent of part-time instructors in the different agencies, and then we have the breakdown by agency of who, how many folks there are. And so this is that second tab you were talking about, Steve, that and a lot of these items on the monitoring page, go back to that for a moment, are really designed for advisor use, because it's just what it says, monitoring. So many of them will open just account, but some will open account and a details tab, so that as an agency, you can dive into seeing specifically who it is behind those counts, who's behind the numbers. And then lastly, we have on the data validation page, again, nothing to show, more just a description of a change that there's a subtle change that affected a few adults that shows now that adults have to have 12 or more hours in a single grant to show up on that grants report. So if you all recall, data validation here means that at the end of the program year, once the dust is settled and all the instructional hours have been added, each adult student can only count once and once in a contract. So if they are participating with hours in multiple contracts, they will appear in the contract in which they had the most hours, with family literacy being the tiebreaker, the priority to that hierarchy. And so what could have happened is someone could have been enrolled with 6 hours in 061 and 6 hours in 064, thus, of course, meeting the 12-hour threshold, but really they're not enrolled in either contract, so they would not show up in either report. So that's the change, is they need to have 12 or more hours in one contract hours. This wasn't a huge number of people, but it did impact some. So with that change, there's an update that you'll notice. And the intent is more to run these data validation reports at the end of the year, because of course, during the year, you have a bit of a moving target where an adult may be moving across and between different contracts. And of course, their hours are changing as you enter their attendance. But at the end of the year, when you run these data validation reports to correspond to that data validation policy, you'll get an accurate picture of counting each student once in the contract in which they had the most hours. And that also now includes the caveat of at least 12 hours in that contract. And one tiny little change too is that in the 054 family literacy, if there are multiple adults assigned to a family, only one of those adults needs to meet adult enrollment, 12 or more hours for the family itself to be enrolled. So many of what I just mentioned really just impacts the family literacy 054 reports and the numbers there. So we've got a couple minutes. Any questions about any of this or any of the other template changes for 25-26? Okay. Well, as a reminder, this is being recorded, so we will post this webinar on the website. It has to be proofed and has to have captions added, so it will take a little bit. But if you need to see that in the short term, feel free to reach out to us with any questions or concerns that you have with the new template. We'll be seeing many of you again in the Friday lunchtime webinar here down the road in the second quarter. Until then, keep us posted with any questions. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to many of you very soon. Yes, Holly, you can use this new template right away. It works with the export from 25-26. All right, be well, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Kelly. Take care. Yes, Jackie, thank you. We will send out the data check summary reports by email starting in November.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to stop the recording. And then just in case there's anybody that was